good to have you back with us here on Down the Road. Everybody's talking about it. It's on everyone's mind. You can't turn on a TV without seeing Ukraine talked about and what America's role in that might be. Well, David Hamilton is an expert when it comes to leadership and national security, founder, chairman of the America's Future series. Let's bring him in, get a chance to visit with him. David, thank you for taking time with us today.
Thanks for having me with you.
First off, tell people about your company so they know who we're talking to.
Sure. So I've got a charity speaker series. It's a nonpartisan speaker series focused on U.S. global competitiveness and national security. Been running that for about 12 years. I retired a couple of years, and this is sort of my baby. This is what we do now. And you just try to get people smarter than us to come and speak about important issues. And we use it as sort of a convening authority to bring thought leaders together. And we put on virtual events and in-person events, and we raise money and awareness for the military causes we care about.
Yeah, good for you, because I can see where there's clearly a need for that. If for nothing else, the conversations with people, as you pointed out, with an intellect that can bring a lot to the conversation. I want to talk about Ukraine. I want to talk about, where we're at when it comes to Ukraine. Is this pulling out, you're pulling some troops back, I should say, just another one of Putin's ploys? I mean, where do you see the situation at?
So, I think of Putin as being a very practical and eminently, sort of unemotional, strategic mind. He's a smart guy. And in this case, I think he is providing a little bit of an opening, an opportunity to de-escalate, which we need to take advantage of. Right? He has certain objectives that he wants to accomplish. If he can achieve those objectives without too much cost, he's going to do it that way. That's what they did in the Crimea. They were able to use a proxy war. They faked they faked Ukrainians that they were really Russians, but they took it over with very little fuss and without all the expenditure of blood or treasure. And he has certain objectives, and one of them is to have the Ukraine not become a member of NATO. He doesn't want an enemy right on his border. Right? He wants a buffer, and so that issue is one of the things he's been fighting against. And he's been posturing to make sure that NATO doesn't get at it.
Does it go deeper in that, David? Is this an individual that is driven by the fact that he wants the old Soviet Union back, or is this all just about NATO and somebody being on his border?
No, I think your assessment is spot on. He's a former KGB agent and leader, and he lived when Russia was the number 1-2 power in the world, and he is a nationalist, and he wants to see Russia return to prominence. And he wakes up every morning trying to figure out how to put Russia first. And if he can gain territory, if he can gain assets and energy, oil and gas from the Ukraine, he's greedy. He wants that.
You mentioned NATO, which means that there is an interest in Ukraine by the NATO countries, or at least there's a discussion over whether or not they should be involved in NATO. Why? Why would NATO be interested in having Ukraine be in NATO?
Yeah, it's a mixed bag, and I don't think it's wise. The Ukrainians are not a well-run country. They're a little corrupt. They've got a lot of issues, so they don't add a lot to that. And then they burden you with the responsibility of protecting them. If you become part of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, then NATO has a responsibility to protect them, and that can only draw them into a war. So there's only a few countries or a few voices that are saying that they should become part of NATO. Not all of Europe is saying that. So, and okay. I think it's unwise.
But yet that seems to be the fear. The one thing that I continually hear is the fact that, look, if the whole thing is to give up the fact that they're not going to be in NATO, why not give up the fact that they're not going to be in NATO? If that pulls the Russian troops back, if that ends what could be a war, then why not just tell them now? I mean, what does NATO owe, I should say, Ukraine, that wouldn't allow us to just say, look, don't worry about it. They're not going to be part of NATO.
Yeah, they need to stay Switzerland. They need to stay neutral. We want to help them. We'll arm them. But America and Europe, I don't think should be in a position where it has to come to the aid and engage in a kinetic war with Russia over them. I think, God bless the child that's got his own. If you arm them and help them protect themselves, that's great. They just comes with a whole a bag of worms if they're a member of NATO. There are other reasons why Putin wants to take over, but that if you get rid of that element, you now have an opportunity to find out. Okay, we took care of that. What else do you want? One thing he wanted was the Nord Stream 2 pipeline approved, and he got that. That made us weaker. It enabled him to make Europe more dependent on them for energy. And that kind of precipitated, that helped this. Now he's going, I've got that. You try to take it away from me, I'm going to consider that an act of war. So I've got the Nord Stream 2, but that's one of the few things we can threaten with. Yeah. But we got to get NATO's approval to cut off Nord Stream 2.
Well, isn't that part of the problem? I mean, the U.S. can talk about sanctions. They can talk about we could do this, we could do that. But if they don't have the support of NATO, of the Germans, when it comes to their very energy supply, it's all a bluff. I mean, it's all a bluff. And so any sanctions you put on, it just shows how weak NATO can be at certain points. And of course,
and our position is weak because look, any sanctions that we put on them, they're going to say, but we have Nord Stream 2. We're selling all that gas and oil. Yeah. And secondly, they're saying, hey, we have more assets. We have more gas. We have Ukrainian natural resources. So you can punish them economically with sanctions, trade, whatever. And he's going to say, it's worth it. I don't care.
Yeah. David, I want to talk about the role that China is playing in all this because, it wasn't that long ago that nobody looked at Russia as though it was some world dominant force anymore. But when I look at it now and I take a look at what could be, it's an alliance between China and Russia, in which case now you've got a situation where a lot of people could be fearful of who is the most powerful military force in the world. And so I'm curious what you think about China's role in all this.
We recall when President Obama chided Mitt Romney and said that the 80s called and wanted its policy back, saying that Russia was no longer a threat. You may recall that little bar, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So then later we've heard, the Russia's the worst thing in the world. We got to worry about Russia misinformation, et cetera, right? So it's interesting how we vacillate back and forth with Russia being a serious adversary or not. And now here we are saying that Russia is a huge adversary. Well, and of course, your point is very well taken. China, in my opinion, is a much bigger threat, They're a much bigger threat. And what they're both doing is it's kind of like if mommy and daddy are distracted by one of the children, the other kid will go off and do something bad, right? So every time they see us weakened, us busy, us distracted, China is being opportunistic and saying, hey, maybe I'll push the envelope in the South China Sea. Maybe I'll push the envelope with regard to Taiwan, right? You're too busy. You're too introspective, for one thing, right? We've been very focused internally on ourselves. Now we're focused on Russia. And the Chinese are going, this is an opportunity. Never waste a crisis.
I look at Crimea and I look at Ukraine and I look at the price that Russia paid in World War II. And you look at the death totals. And of course, when you look at the areas where most of that happened, you'd look at Crimea, you'd look at Ukraine. And so, we think of things in the U.S. in terms of 4 years of a presidency. We don't look at it in terms of a long history. We're basically a young country. I realize that. And so how big of a factor does that play into some of what Putin is looking at and what the Russian people believe?
Well, so they do have a much longer view of the world. And they have much deeper roots in histories. They have much deeper hurts and grudges, et cetera, right? And so that's one thing. Secondly, they do like to play chess. Some people say we play checkers. I would argue that we play hopscotch. Okay, we're just kind of yipping along down the road and not looking left or right. These people look long-term, many moves in advance because they have a long history and a long memory. The Chinese refer to the 100 years after the Opium Wars as the century of humiliation. That's their term for it. They hold a grudge against the West. When the British were trying to addict their people on opium, et cetera, in the Opium Wars, ever since, they feel they've been marginalized. They feel like they have been humiliated by the West. They may not say that out loud, but they hold that sentiment in their hearts, and they want revenge. They want to take over the world. They are the Borg. They are Pinky in the Brain. They wake up every night thinking, how am I going to take over the world? And the Russians do the same thing. And we're playing hopscotch while they're both playing chess.
How do people find your work? How can people be part of that conversation, David?
So we're always looking for speakers, and we're always looking for moderators, hosts, et cetera. You know, we're a group of people very inclusive. We are rapidly nonpartisan. We say that the only existential threat we face is partisanship. If we can't figure out how to get along, we can't fix these big problems that we're talking about right here. Okay, so I'm not considered a conservative. Okay, but that doesn't mean I can't have a conversation, be critical of something like what we're doing as we're doing in Russia and with China. We are a nonpartisan think tank and speakers bureau, if you will, speakers series, and we would love people to go to afseries.com, look us up, find our information, email me, etc. We are like you. We're always looking for brilliant people to come talk and share their opinion.
Well, I think I got one today. David, thank you for coming on. I appreciate that.